She just wasn't in love with me anymore. That's what she said when she handed me the divorce papers with a straight face, like we hadn't spent our entire teenage and adult lives together. I still remember how my world just froze at that moment. We were high school sweethearts, met when we were 15, dated all through high school, then college. People used to call us the perfect couple. We even worked together on projects, applying for jobs together right after college. We were inseparable, or so I thought. By the time we were in our early 20s, we both had steady jobs and everything seemed to be lining up just right. I felt like it was time to take things to the next level. So I proposed, and she said yes without a second of hesitation. Getting married was, I thought, just the next natural step in our lives. We had built everything together from scratch, both our careers and our future plans. Our families were thrilled. I could see my parents beaming with pride. It was one of the happiest days of my life. For the first couple of years, everything seemed fine. We were just two young adults figuring out life and marriage. It was exciting, and we were happy, at least I was. I honestly thought we were in this together. But around our second anniversary, things started to feel different. It was subtle at first. She was just a bit quieter, maybe a little distant. I thought it was stress from work, or maybe she was just adjusting to married life. I tried to talk to her about it, but she brushed it off, said everything was fine. I did my best to bring back that spark. I planned date nights, took days off just to surprise her with small trips, and bought her gifts, flowers, anything I could think of. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid and she needed more time to feel settled. I tried to be patient, but the distance kept growing. I could feel her pulling away, and I couldn't figure out why. It was like trying to hold water in my hands. It just kept slipping away no matter what I did. Then, a few weeks before what would have been our third anniversary, she sat me down. I still remember the way she looked at me, so calm and detached. She told me she wanted a divorce. No warning, no explanation. Just, that was it. I felt blindsided. I mean, we'd been through everything together. First loves, heartbreaks, college struggles, starting our careers. I thought we had a lifetime of memories that would keep us together, that we'd work through any problem. But according to her, there was no problem to work on. She just didn't feel the same anymore. I begged her to explain, to give me a reason, any reason. All she would say was, "I'm not in love with you anymore." That's it. No other explanation. She refused to go to counseling, to talk to a therapist, nothing. I had no choice. I couldn't force her to stay, and it was clear she didn't want to. It was a quick divorce, no kids, not much shared property, nothing that would complicate things. She packed up her things and moved to another city right after, and that was the last I heard from her. I didn't even know where she'd gone exactly. She just vanished from my life completely. Friends mentioned that she cut off contact with everyone we knew, even with her own family, which was strange, but I figured she was moving on. Just like that, I was left with nothing but questions and a silence that stretched on for months. No closure, no idea what went wrong, just a chapter of my life closed without any warning or real explanation. After the divorce, I expected at least my family would be there for me. I mean, who else would you turn to when your whole life just crumbles out of nowhere? But somehow, I found myself completely alone. The weird thing is, it didn't happen all at once. At first, it was just little things. My parents weren't picking up the phone as often, and when I tried to visit, they always seemed busy. My sister, who I'd always been close to, suddenly got too busy with her own life and barely replied to my texts. Then one day, I went online to check my social media, and I couldn't find any of them. It was like they'd all vanished, and I was confused. I figured maybe it was a mistake, but when I tried to contact them, nothing happened. Calls went straight to voicemail. Messages were left unread. It felt like my whole family just disappeared. It hit me hard because this was right when I needed them most. My world had already turned upside down after my wife left, and now my family seemed to be walking out on me too. I couldn't understand it. I kept wondering what I did wrong. One evening, desperate for answers, I decided to drive to my parents' house. I remember standing at their doorstep, knocking and waiting, feeling like a stranger. It was dark, and after a while I could see a light turn on inside, so I knew someone was there, but no one came to the door. I knocked again, waited, and still nothing. After standing there for what felt like forever, I finally gave up and drove home, feeling humiliated and completely abandoned. For the next few months, I tried to keep reaching out. I'd send messages, try calling from time to time, hoping maybe they'd answer, maybe something would change, but it never did. They had all blocked me on social media, even my sister. I'd never been through anything like this in my life. And honestly, I had no clue how to handle it. It was like I'd lost everyone all at once, without any explanation. The impact hit me hard. With the divorce, I already felt like a failure, questioning everything about myself and my life, and then to have my own family ignore me like I didn't even exist, it crushed me. I could barely focus on work, and I started spiraling. It felt like every bit of support I had, everything familiar, had been ripped away. Eventually, I couldn't keep up the effort anymore. I left my job because I just couldn't bring myself to show up every day pretending I was okay. I hit rock bottom pretty quickly after that. Days turned into weeks and then months. I didn't care about anything. I'd spend most of my time in my apartment, barely going outside, just trying to understand how my life had fallen apart so fast. Friends tried to reach out, but even they started to fade away after a while. I'd always been the reliable one, the person people leaned on, and now I couldn't even hold myself together. It was the loneliest time of my life. I felt like I'd been erased, like I was nothing to the people I'd known my entire life. My family, who should have been there for me, were nowhere to be found. I kept hoping it was all just a phase, that one day I'd get a call, an apology, some sort of explanation, but that call never came. Hitting rock bottom like that forced me to realize something. If I wanted any change, I'd have to make it happen on my own. No one was going to pull me out of this pit. My family was gone, my ex-wife had moved on, and I had two choices: stay there, stuck in the worst time of my life, or do something about it. I remember one of my close friends, Mike, checking in on me. He had no idea what was really going on, just that I was a mess. I hadn't told him about my family cutting me off, but he must have sensed I was struggling because he kept showing up. Mike and a few other friends pulled me back to reality bit by bit. They got me out of the house, took me to get food, and made sure I wasn't just shutting myself off from the world. Slowly, with their help, I started feeling like myself again. And in the middle of all that, an old dream started creeping back up. I'd always wanted to open a restaurant. Cooking was something I loved, but I'd put it on hold when I got married. I told myself it wasn't practical, that I needed to focus on stability. But now, with no family around to support or hold me back, I realized there was no one to tell me no, so I went for it. I scraped together whatever savings I had left, reached out to investors, and just put everything into building a plan. It wasn't easy. Some days, I felt like I was completely insane for even trying, like I'd crash and burn before I even got started. But every time I doubted myself, one of my friends was there to push me forward. Slowly, things started to come together. I found a small spot, worked on a menu, and spent hours making sure every detail was right. I had nothing left to lose, so I threw myself into it. Finally, after years of effort, my restaurant opened, and it was rough at first. Sure, the hours were brutal and the stress was high, but for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt alive again. I was doing something that mattered to me, something that I could actually be proud of. And the best part, it started to catch on. People liked what I was doing. They came back, told their friends, and soon enough, the place was buzzing. Somewhere along the way, through the chaos of running a business, I met someone who actually understood me. Her name was Emily. We met at a friend's party. Mike introduced us, actually, and it turned out she was a regular at my restaurant. I hadn't realized it, but she told me she'd been coming in for months. We hit it off almost immediately. She was funny, down to earth, and just easy to talk to. I felt comfortable with her in a way I hadn't with anyone in a long time. For 3 years, we took things slow. I didn't want to rush into anything, and she was understanding about that. We'd both been through enough to know things couldn't be forced, but the more time we spent together, the clearer it became that we both wanted a future. So, after 3 years of dating, I proposed. I'll never forget the way she smiled when she said yes. It was the first time in a long time that I actually felt like I had a family again. Now, 10 years later, here we are. We've got an amazing 8-year-old son. And not only is my personal life finally where I wanted it to be, but my business has grown too. What started as one small restaurant has turned into a chain. I'm part of my own hospitality group now with restaurants and hotels, and we're even looking to expand out of state. I've come a long way from that guy who felt completely lost and alone with nothing and no one. And every step of the way, Emily and my friends were right there, proving to me that family isn't always who you're born with. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stand by you when you need it the most. Things were finally going well. I had a business I was proud of, a loving wife, a son who meant the world to me, and a real sense of stability I built from scratch. I thought I'd left all the pain from my past behind me, buried under years of hard work and good memories. Then, out of nowhere, my family just shows up. It was almost like a bad dream. The people I hadn't heard from in 2 decades, standing in the lobby of my office building, waiting for me. It all started after an interview I did for a local news channel. They wanted to cover my story, the journey from one small restaurant to a growing chain. I shared my story with them, talked about how I'd been through tough times and how I'd built everything up with the help of close friends and, of course, my wife. They even showed some family photos I'd shared during the interview, pictures of Emily, my son, and our life together. I thought it was just a nice way to reflect on how far I'd come. Little did I know that this interview would lead to my family reappearing in my life. A few days after it aired, the receptionist called me to say my family was there to see me. At first, I thought she meant Emily and our son, but she clarified she meant my parents and my sister. I was shocked, to say the least. They hadn't contacted me once in 20 years, and suddenly they were just waiting downstairs as if nothing had happened. I told the receptionist to let them know I was busy, hoping they'd leave, but they wouldn't go. Instead, they started causing a scene, demanding to see me. I had no choice but to go down and face them. When I walked into the lobby, they looked at me like nothing had ever gone wrong. They started pouring on the compliments, telling me how proud they were, how amazing it was to see me on TV, how inspiring my story was. It was bizarre hearing these words from people who'd chosen to cut me out when I was at my lowest. I could barely believe they had the nerve to act like we were all still close, like they hadn't erased me from their lives. But they didn't stop there. They'd seen the family photos in the interview and started talking about how much they wanted to meet my wife and son. They even went so far as to imply that I hadn't done enough to try to reconnect with them after the divorce. That hit a nerve. They were acting like I'd just been distant by choice, like I hadn't tried time and time again to get back in touch, to have some support, and each time been ignored or blocked. It was surreal. So I decided to let them talk, hoping I might finally get some answers about why they abandoned me all those years ago. I sat there listening as they tried to explain, piecing together the puzzle of what had actually happened, and little by little, the truth came out. It turns out the reason they cut ties with me was tied to my ex-wife and my cousin. They told me that after the divorce, my ex-wife was pregnant with a child she had with my cousin. My own family had helped cover up her affair, all to keep the peace with my uncle, who had a lot of influence in our family and in my father's work. I felt blindsided all over again. Not only had my wife been unfaithful, but my entire family had known and actively kept it from me. They chose her, chose my cousin over me, just so they wouldn't lose their connection to my uncle's business. And now, years later, they decided to come back into my life, conveniently after seeing I was successful. I realized right there in that lobby that they weren't here because they missed me. They were here because they saw an opportunity to reconnect now that I'd built something worthwhile. I couldn't sit there and listen anymore. I told them to leave, and when they protested, saying they wanted to make things right, I let them know exactly how I felt. I'd built my life without them, and I didn't need them now. Sitting there in that lobby, I let them talk, hoping there might be something, anything, that could explain why they had turned their backs on me all those years ago. But as they started filling in the gaps, I realized it was so much worse than anything I'd ever imagined. Turns out, right around the time my ex-wife blindsided me with that divorce, she was actually pregnant. But here's the thing. She wasn't carrying my child. No, she was pregnant with my cousin's baby. My cousin, the spoiled kid everyone made excuses for, the one who never had to face consequences because of some family loyalty that only seemed to protect him no matter what he did. Apparently, they'd been having an affair, and not only did my family know about it, but they'd actively helped cover it up. According to them, when she decided she wanted to leave me, they thought it would be better to keep everything quiet. They didn't want to risk upsetting my uncle, who'd always held a lot of power in the family. My father had worked for my uncle his whole life, practically depended on him, and somehow they saw my marriage falling apart as a small price to pay to stay on my uncle's good side. My parents even admitted they'd let my ex-wife move out without telling me she was pregnant. They let me believe I was the problem, that she was simply not in love with me anymore. Then they dropped another bombshell on me. I had a daughter, and she was almost 20 now. My ex-wife had my cousin's baby, but she'd never told our daughter anything about me. For 20 years, this girl grew up thinking my cousin was her real father, the same cousin who'd betrayed me, who my family had protected. They'd kept her hidden from me, letting me go through life thinking I was alone without even a chance to know my own daughter. And they'd done it all to avoid angering my uncle and losing whatever security they had in the family business. As they kept talking, every piece started to fall into place. The cold shoulders, the blocked numbers, the door that was never opened when I went to visit, all of it made sense now, twisted as it was. They hadn't cared about my happiness or well-being. They hadn't even cared about family. They'd cared about avoiding drama, about keeping things easy for themselves. And now, 2 decades later, they were sitting in front of me acting like they deserved a second chance because they'd seen my face on TV. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, betrayal, disgust. It was a storm of everything, but I kept it together. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down in my own building. I calmly told them to leave, that I couldn't even consider forgiving them after what they'd done. I told them that I didn't owe them anything, and if they thought they could just waltz back into my life and pick up where they left off, they were dead wrong. I'd built my life without them, through my own hard work and with people who actually cared about me. They hadn't been there for any of it, and now they expected to reap the benefits. They tried to argue, of course. My sister, in particular, kept saying I was overreacting, that family is supposed to forgive. But as far as I was concerned, they had stopped being family the moment they chose to protect her betrayal and hide my own child from me. They were strangers now, and I wasn't about to let them back into my life just because they suddenly found me useful. I ended the conversation by telling them I didn't want to see them again. Not now. Not ever. They'd made their choice 20 years ago, and they'd have to live with that. After my family left that day, I thought that would be it. I figured that they'd finally got the message that I wanted nothing to do with them. But, of course, it wasn't over yet. A few days after they stormed out, they started sending messages and emails trying to apologize, saying they wanted to make amends. They'd show up outside my office hoping to catch me on the way in or out, but I ignored them every time. I'd walk past without even looking in their direction, refusing to give them another chance to pull me back into their twisted idea of family. But as I tried to put the pieces of my life back together after learning the truth, there was one person I couldn't stop thinking about. My daughter. I had spent the last 20 years completely unaware that she even existed, and now that I knew about her, it was like a door had been opened that I couldn't just close again. Emily and I talked about it for days, going back and forth on what to do. She was incredibly supportive, even though I knew it had to be difficult for her to process all of this too. In the end, we decided we had to reach out to her, at least give her a chance to know who I really was. So I found her on social media and I sent her a message. I explained as best as I could who I was, what had happened, and why she'd never heard from me before. I was nervous, waiting for a reply, not knowing how she'd react to finding out her entire life had been based on a lie. Part of me wondered if she'd even believe me. It took about 2 weeks, but eventually she responded. She told me that she'd confronted her mother about everything I told her and that her mother had finally admitted the truth. My daughter was shocked, hurt, and confused. Everything I expected her to be. But she said that she wanted to meet me, to hear my side of the story in person, and to try and make sense of everything. We agreed to meet in her city that weekend. Emily and our son came along, and I was grateful for their support. I didn't know what to expect, and honestly, I was terrified. This was my daughter, my own flesh and blood, and I'd missed her entire life. I'd missed her first words, her first steps, birthdays, holidays, every major milestone. And here she was, a grown woman, and I was just meeting her for the first time. When we finally met, it was awkward at first. She looked so much like her mother that it nearly took my breath away. But her expression, her mannerisms, those were her own. We spent hours just talking, getting to know each other. She asked me questions about my life, about why I never reached out before. I explained everything as carefully and honestly as I could, and I could see her trying to piece together this new reality. As we talked, I could tell she was going through a whirlwind of emotions. She admitted she felt betrayed, not just by her mother, but by the family who had kept the truth from her all these years. But she also seemed determined to move forward, to understand who I was and where she came from. I couldn't believe her strength. Here was this young woman, my daughter, facing the kind of heartbreak and confusion most people would struggle with, and she handled it with a level of maturity that made me proud. We had dinner together that night, all of us, like a real family. She got along well with Emily and even bonded with her half-brother, which warmed my heart more than I could have hoped. As the night ended, she told me she wanted to stay in touch, to build a relationship. She wasn't ready to dive into anything too deep yet, and I completely understood. But just knowing she wanted to try was enough for me. As for my parents and the rest of my family, they've kept trying to get back in touch, sending messages filled with apologies and excuses. But I'm done. They made their choice, and as far as I'm concerned, they can live with it. My focus now is on building something real with my daughter and moving forward with the family I have. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.